I've got 3 books I'm going to show you that changed my life in understanding trauma. And the first one is in 2017, after years of doing work on myself, trying to understand myself, I came across this book, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. Well worn. Second book that I have. And he talks about the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. He termed, I believe, I don't want to get this wrong, but the idea of fawn was where we're extra nice to people because we don't want to be abandoned. That happens when we're very small and in families. It generally starts there, and it can happen when we're adults, but generally it does start out as when we're children. We also have this book, I would say. He talks about, I'm going to run through a little bit of this. It's very extensive, and it's a good idea if you do get this book that you're working through stuff with somebody, because it can bring up a lot of stuff. But he talks about levels of recovering, toxic shame, grieving, and the fine points of recovering from trauma, yeah. Also, it's very extensive. I want to go there. The definition of complex PTSD, really important to understand. See, I do agree to some point that we've all had trauma, but some people have had such horrendous trauma. It doesn't make people special. It just means that we don't want to water down what the term trauma is. However, reading this book, you'll begin to understand how much your life is based on trauma, or how much of it is based on your perception. Really important. I would also say one of the next books I came across, not the next in line, but one of the next ones I love. This is called Trauma and Recovery. This is by Judith Herman. And Judith Herman, she coined the term complex trauma, okay, which we now have complex PTSD. And this talks about trafficking, war, violence, and those different types of traumas that can be very tragic in society that still go on. I will add that I recently read Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which was very touching, because again, you get another level of understanding different types of trauma. He was in the camps in Auschwitz, and he explains his story, and he helped people with something called logotherapy, if I've pronounced that correctly. And then further on, I did get into reading Carl Jung, and I came across this book, which is called Trauma and the Soul. And this book was about £35 to buy. I don't know what that would be in dollars. Let's say it's a $40 book. I love this book because of some of the art in it as well. And also, Donald Cowshed, who wrote this book, talks about something called the self-care system. So the more we understand, the more we understand. However, the point would be at some point that we begin to come out of trauma and we begin to empower ourselves to live a full life. I know that in communities, people will say that they were a victim, and also people might say they're a survivor. Clearly, we use the terms that we feel most comfortable with, and it's okay with language when we're healing to request from our friends and loved ones not to use certain words that trigger us, and also to explain why. You know, we're not just telling people to not say something. For instance, the terms to a trauma that maybe somebody had, if we just say let it go or forgive, it's really inappropriate, and people need education on that. And it's not easy for people to understand unless they really understand what trauma is or what that means to somebody, because every person's going to take what happened to them, I'm looking at the book, in a different way. I'm going to show you a few pictures from here that you might find a bit shocking. This is Kronos, devouring his children. So in mythology, we have a lot of stuff. Can you see this picture here? That's Kronos. And then there was a beautiful one on the front of this book. You see this book here? You've got the angel, the dark angel and the light angel, and you can see the child here. So this book is a psycho-spiritual approach to human development, and it's in interruption. And what we're doing is we're integrating what we've been through. And again, I come back to that it's very easy, particularly in the society that we live in, to stay stuck in our traumas, and the years go by and we don't get to live. So we have to look at how we're going to pull ourselves out of that and begin to live fully. And it's not easy, because some people have been so badly affected by what they've been through that they live it even in dream state. I know people that have been through war, a few people who are friends of mine, and one person told me that if he hears a helicopter, then he'll get triggered, you know, so we get triggered. So what we're doing is we're learning through Pete Walker's book, which is fabulous, to learn to self-regulate. And learning to self-regulate can take a long time, but the more we know, the more we know. So psychoeducation is a big part of, even if we don't do talk therapy, as an example, it's not for everybody. I had 2 years of trauma psychoanalysis for trauma that I experienced as a child that was affecting me very badly. However, different things for different people. So some people may not be able to tolerate and be too triggered by having psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. Some people may need EMDR. Some people may just need a loving friend to understand them. But I would say that psychoeducation goes a long way to being able to change our perception about how we feel about ourselves, and then what we see going on in the world outside us. And also, when we do talk to people, we can realize that we're not alone, that there's nothing wrong with us. It's really important to understand that the human experience is so individual, and what's right for one person will not be right for another. And then also, once we've had trauma, we could have further trauma later in our life, or we may not have had childhood trauma at all, but we experience different types of trauma, like a collective trauma or a war zone trauma. This happens to people. And the issue is, in childhood trauma, we're still developing, so we don't have the skills or the ability to be able to verbalize it, or we're not safe. So, you know, we need to make sure that kids definitely are looked after. Even if they're not our own children, we need to look out for the children. Really important. I did do a course during the week, which was Janina, I think, Fisher, and it was wonderful. It was a 16-hour event. I think it was 8 hours and 8 hours, 16 hours. And that's gone towards my further development training. So we can do lots of courses as well, and they don't have to be for anything particular other than we want to do it for ourselves. And then we can pass on that information as we gain wisdom and knowledge. Very important in trauma as well is that we do not should people, unless that somebody's hurting themselves, that we do not should, and that we try and avoid one-liners in order to try and help somebody. Because often when we hear somebody else's trauma, it can, if we've not experienced trauma ourselves, then it can be very embarrassing to hear somebody's pain or to see somebody in pain. And we have to be able to learn to listen to each other and give each other a hand, and also working with the inner child and the inner critic to understand that the inner critic is an introject, something that we've taken on board as a child, and that we have to work with that to change it. So things you can do is say stop with these voices. You can tell it to those voices to F off. I found that very useful for me, because we do need to get to self-love, and not in a cliche sort of way, but in a way that has depth and it has understanding, and where we allow ourselves to have the time to grieve as well. So many different phases we go through. And also to remove ourselves from addictions. And we've all got one or another. We've all got one going on at one time or another. Some of them can be healthy and some of them can be unhealthy. And we have to decide what's what for us. But if our addictions are hurting other people, then clearly we need to be able to own up to that. And we'll all do that in our own way as well. There's no one way to being fully healed. We can be whole. We're always whole, in my view. There's no time that we're not. It's just that we may not feel that we are whole in our being. And we have to come to terms with the fact that we are, and that we're a work in progress within that wholeness. And there are many ways you can do that. You can look at Carl Jung's work as well, which is delving in deeper. Look at the shadow. The shadow work is really beautiful, because when we stop denying that we've got our little gremlins and we're little monsters and we're not perfect, then we can begin to be kinder to ourselves. You know, when you see a child that, you know, wants to pull off a Barbie head's doll, as an example, we've all got that in us, the idea that we want to not pull people's heads off, but where we want to, you know, have a moment of inner rage and stuff like that. But we can release all of those things in really healthy ways. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Okay, catch you later.